Join us for the Criterion Institute podcast as Joy Anderson, a global thought leader in business and social change, leads us through a series of discussions, interviews, frameworks, rants, and reframes that will help you better understand how to use finance as a tool for transformative systems change.
I am Joy Anderson, and this is the Criterion Institute podcast. This is the fourth episode, which is focused on the 5 pillars of Criterion's strategic plan. And so in this episode, we primarily dive into the pillar which we call Invite a Financial Imagination. So the first segment in this episode looks at the reasons behind that pillar, some of our approaches to creating change within the pillar, the sort of rationale for why we focus on inviting a financial imagination. The second segment of this episode focuses on a paper that we wrote called A Feminist Financial Imagination. The full title was Fostering a Feminist Financial Imagination. And in some ways, pairing these together is interesting because the paper that we wrote, we've been working for about a year on a paper articulating what a feminist financial imagination would look like. And we had been working hard to really attend to feminist frameworks and work with our feminist friends to bring together the best of these two worlds. What would a feminist imagination paired with a financial imagination create within the world? Fortuitously, the release of this paper was timed with the release of a paper from AWID, the Association for Women in Development, which had also been about a year-long study about gender-led investing by AWID, which is a feminist organization. And the result of that study was a paper called Gender Impact Investing and the Rise of False Solutions. And so again, one of our key parts of the work that Criterion is doing that these two segments tie together is our sustained work in inviting people who don't see themselves as part of finance, who don't see themselves as part of this system or able to engage with it, and that sustained work to invite people to see themselves as change agents and that finance can be a tool for social change, limited as it is. And while there are many false solutions out there, there are also many possibilities. And our ongoing work that this pillar so clearly guides us on is to continue to inspire, to continue to invite a financial imagination that expands on what is possible. Of the 5 pillars of Criterion's strategic plan, the one we name Invite Financial Imagination is perhaps the longest of Criterion's commitments. It is about how do we engage in using finance to create social change. And so this pillar starts with those who are trying to create social change. They are the people, whether they're an investor or they sit inside of a government or they're a civil society or a nonprofit organization working on social change. This starts with the people who are trying to create change. And then the question is, can finance be useful for creating that change? And again, finance, as we often say, has limited utility. It is not going to transform rights for human beings globally. But there is more that they can do. There is more that finance can do to create social change. And one of the core challenges in its ability, in investors and fund managers and others' ability to create social change, is too often we start with finance as opposed to starting with the change we're trying to seek. We measure outcomes too often by how much money is moved, not whether or not the change has been created. So at the core of this pillar, the goal is that organizations, governments, and investors use a broader financial imagination to design and implement new ways of using investments and engaging systems of finance in their work to achieve gender equality and other social justice objectives. Finance cannot create. The people who work in finance, the systems of finance, are not able to create a world in a silo. It must be guided by those with deep knowledge and experience of how social change happens. And one of the core imbalances that this pillar is seeking to address is that too often in impact investing or gender lens investing, we privilege the knowledge, the impulse, the goals of finance over the goal of social change. So why is this so important? Why is this important that we focus and stick to it for the next 10 years? And that's because finance cannot solve social issues in a silo. With the growth of impact investing, gender lens investing, and other related fields, it's imperative that the social change leaders with deep knowledge of issues and knowledge of impacted communities are at the center of designing solutions involving finance. Inviting those social change leaders to the table is not a single action. It's not a single invitation. It's an ongoing process of making people feel welcome, useful, comfortable as they explore new territories. Invitation may begin with a literal invitation to join an event or to read a white paper, but it is an ongoing process that's about inspiring trust, deepening relationship, and cultivating long-term partnerships for transformation. Criterion works with change makers. And in some ways, what we're inviting all change makers through this pillar, whether they are government actors, investors, civil society organizations, is to persuade them to use their power, to use finance, to create equitable social change, and to bring a broader imagination to that, to expand our imagination of what's possible. And we believe that really only happens when you bring together voices that have been traditionally left out of the design. And so we need to expand who's in this conversation to be able to stretch our imagination. But often newcomers to a conversation about finance don't start with an imagination. They start afraid to talk. They're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. They are often scoffed at. It's not just that it's in their heads. And so in the end, the problem here, though, is about imagination, not implementation. Too often we focus on how do we do something? What will it take to put something in place? But we haven't yet fully explored what the ideas are, what is possible. And so in one area of our work, the work that we've done on gender-based violence, we've had a critical path to build a sense of possibility that we can use finance to address gender-based violence. We've also done that by looking at questions of menstrual health and saying, how can finance be used to address menstrual health, and not just by financing menstrual health products to be on shelves, but by shifting supply chains or shifting norms? What is a broader set of possibilities of how we can create social change? And so in this, we've had some really vital partners over the years. I want to call out Wallace Global Fund actually as one. From the very beginning of gender lens investing, they've stood by us and many of our partners to push us to think more boldly, to stretch and say, but what about deeper social justice causes? Can we go farther and not only focus on women on boards or women in representation, but can we push ourselves to look more deeply? And they have been one of the funders that has really bridged the world of social justice and activism, in particular women's rights, with finance. Another partner in this that we aspire to be like is Adesina. Right? They are an investor who is fundamentally embedding a financial imagination in how they work and expanding that to include civil society. And so that is a dialogue with those most affected by the issues and how finance can respond. This also is important within governments or donor agencies like Global Affairs Canada or the DFAT in Australia. Both of those there are been leaders within those organizations, people like Tricia Gray and others, who have developed a financial imagination, who have stretched themselves to think in different ways and imagine that more is possible. One of the moments that this came together for us was actually in a partnership with the Women International League of Peace and Freedom. And Madeline Reese, who is leads that organization, she's just retiring now, but at the time she led the organization. She was in conversations about Afghanistan and called us and said, I've heard about you. I need to figure out how to stretch the imagination to say how we can use finance to address post-conflict issues around rights and economic empowerment. And so that led us to a dialogue with her for 6 months or so, a partnership with the organization and with Oak Foundation, who was willing to fund our collaboration to really look at how can we advance the agenda of women, peace, and security organizations like WILF, who want to think about ways that finance could be one solution, not the end solution, not replacing advocacy within governments, not replacing activism, not replacing research, but one other way to say what is possible for how we can advance the social change that we seek. So in the end, we envision a future in which finance as a tool is a ubiquitous strategy used, deployed by diverse social change organizations. And that the funding world recognizes that philanthropists, governments, donor agencies, others see themselves as funding social change, not just funding the movement of capital, but funding the leadership of social change that embeds a financial imagination in what they see as possible. One of the most elegant pieces of work that Criterion has done was led by Christina Madden, Pablo Freund, and Melanie Hilton. And it was an exploration of what a feminist financial imagination was. What an amazingly problematic, troublesome juxtaposition of three words: feminist, financial, imagination. There are not many times where those three words are brought together in the same phrase. But it challenges both a feminist imagination and a financial imagination, and the ways that the three play off of each other. So I can riff on this, but I do believe that the definitions that Christina and Pablo and Melanie worked on represent this the best. What they wrote is that a feminist financial imagination is a solutions-oriented mindset. It facilitates the formation of new ideas, visioning of alternative futures, and uncovering of possibilities that would ensure the power and tools of financial systems are channeled towards advancing gender equality and justice in transformative ways. It recognizes that finance is a system that was made up by humans, and therefore humans can change it. A feminist financial imagination understands the deep flaws and inequities in the current financial system and in much of the framing that's been developed thus far about the intersection of gender and finance. It owns that one way to address these flaws and inequities is for feminists to collectively recognize their power to engage with finance and to change its value system and redefine what outcomes define success. And it holds space for those who are entering the dialogue from a variety of starting places and with various theories of change of how to advance gender justice and equality. A feminist financial imagination requires, first and foremost, that we acknowledge the ways in which financial systems have exacerbated injustice and inequality, and at times, financial systems have perpetuated violence and exploitation. It compels us to creatively engage with reorganizations of power and possible alternatives to the patriarchal structures within finance and investments. It supports us in thinking about how we might utilize feminist process, governance structures, principles, values, and frameworks to redesign and realign systems of finance to be more feminist and gender transformative. It can help us uncover insights that would inform the design and the development of feminist intervention policies, valuation methodologies, financial products and service, investment vehicles, and more. It does not require a business case, since none has been needed to maintain business as usual. Concept of a feminist financial imagination, in so many ways, exploratory and radical. It is neither definitive nor final, and the dialogue that it spurs, that this phrase invites, is that we do not have perfect solutions, and we may raise more questions than we are able to answer. But we know that, ultimately, the more feminist actors that engage with the concept, the more powerfully we'll be able to collectively challenge the status quo and reimagine how financial systems can be used to unlock the potential for transformative, equitable, inclusive, and sustainable change. That is the introduction to a delightful paper which unpacks tangibly how you implement a feminist financial imagination, how you build one, how you foster one, how you put one in place, and what that can create. In conclusion, I just want to acknowledge the leadership that Christina and Pablo and Melanie brought to this thinking and how much it's contributed to Criterion's work overall.
To learn more about our work, visit us at criterioninstitute.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help our podcast reach a wider audience. Thanks for listening.